Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us. This is the um, Broadband Hui number 260. And just as a reminder, we're on the first and third Wednesdays of each month. And thanks to our community access television partners, this gets recorded and televised on a schedule for the community access television. I think both Hawaii and Maui are on. Let's see, let me make sure I'm referring to the right ones. Who do we have? We have Big Island. Naleo's on the Big Island, and then we have Ho'ike on Kauai. So, and thanks to them, they have been recording and televising this on their schedule over the course of the next couple of weeks. So I want to do some quick introductions. We have a small crowd here today, and I think it's probably a result of going into the holiday season. My name is Bert Lum. I'm in the broadband office. My co-host Chrissy is located somewhere in Waikiki at a telehealth conference. So I'm gonna take you through the agenda, and it'll probably be a relatively short meeting since we have just a couple of items on the agenda. But I do want to share this next slide for our mana'o of the day. So, last Broadband Hui, we had, a saying which, let me pull it up. It was "Eheleme ka pu olo, eheleme ka pu olo," which is, leave every person, place, or condition better than you found it. And I kind of related that to the season that we're in, which is makahiki. And so I just wanted to share this particular saying that you might hear over the course of, the next months between like October and February. And it's lono ika makahiki, lono ika makahiki. So this is typically the saying that takes place by people that are recognizing, this period of the year. And during this period of the year, typically there's the makahiki festivals. And these festivals take place all across the state. And the one that I'm most familiar with is the one that has been done on Kaho'olawe. And typically there's a makahiki opening and a makahiki closing. And what happens is that everybody who participates, there will be something called ho'okupu, and that's an offering that you bring from your place and it could be everything from kalo to uala to ulu. I mean, there's all kinds of food and fish that is presented as a offering. And typically what happens is over the course of the opening and the closing, these offerings are put on the lele. And in the diagram here, that's the lono figure that gets kind of marched. There's a procession that takes place that goes on a particular trail. And then the ho'okupu is offered at certain locations on the lele. So anyway, that's the kind of a quick snapshot on what happens during the makahiki festivals. And if you are so fortunate to be able to participate in one, it's really kind of a great, opportunity to get a sense of not only the culture, but, get a connection back to the Aina. And so this is the season. It's a season, the rainy season. It's a season of rebirth, the season of renewal. And I think it's a great time to take, take it upon ourselves to be thankful and to, you know, give back to the Aina that's been so fruitful for us over the, over the course of the entire year. So anyway, that is my sharing of the mana'o of the day, and it is Lono Ikamakahiki. Okay, with that, I would like to welcome, and I think most of the folks are regulars on the Broadband Hui. I invited Natalie Perez to talk about a paper that she was involved in, and this was actually introduced to me by Annalyn, and it came at a time when there were some interesting discussions going on with AI safety and kind of the interest in how we can start to take a look at what is happening with AI, and how do we want to consider the choices that are being put in front of us with regard to AI. And so when Annalyn introduced the paper to me, and then I kind of did a search, and Natalie, you can talk a little bit about what the Aula Fellowship is, and the relationship with the other kind of like co-authors of the paper. It just happens that Natalie is here in Hawaii, so it was fortunate that she responded to my request on LinkedIn, and we got her to actually be a part of the Broadband Hui and share a little bit about the paper that was written about levers of power when it comes to this new environment of AI. So with that, I wanted to give her a chance to share about the paper, and also let's see, give her a chance to if you have a part. I assume you have a little presentation. So Natalie, I made it open so that you can share your screen, and I would give you the floor, and then if there's any questions at the end, Natalie is available to answer any questions, and then we can talk a little bit about what we would like to see happen, as a result of this, as we move, into 2026. So Natalie, you can add anything to that introduction that I might have left out.
That was a great introduction. Hello, everyone. As Bert said, I'm Natalie, and I'm thrilled to be here chatting today. I'll just maybe share first a bit of my positionality. So, born and raised in Hawaii, originally, from the North Shore, but moved to Ewa Beach in second grade, and so really consider Ewa my home. I am a University of Hawaii graduate through and through. So, started in our community colleges and up to my PhD in learning design and technology. And for the past 6 years, I had been working at Amazon and AWS as a senior research scientist. My work really centered on, what is this kind of new AI thing that was happening? And so started to dive into the world of generative artificial intelligence in 2023 and started to specialize in Gen AI evaluation. And so since then, I have left Amazon AWS for a different corporation, but still working as a research scientist. And my focus is, again, on AI evaluation, but also AI governance across an enterprise or organizational perspective. And in addition to that, I also work as a research fellow at the Aula Fellowship for AI Science and Technology. It's a think tank, it's a nonprofit, and we're really focused on facilitating global conversations on AI and really the responsible use of AI. So the organization has a bunch of different researchers from nonprofits and from corporations and from the higher education sphere. So we're kind of all over the place. We are also based all around the world. So I think I'm the only person right now sort of from the larger Polynesia, but I'm hoping to change that. But we have people based all across Africa, Europe, and North and South America as well. Um, So that's a little bit about Ala and my background. And so one of the things that we have been seeing as, as a research organization is really considering what's happening in these organizations. We're seeing AI really ramp up and just explode across certainly corporations. And we were also seeing a lot of patterns of these big corporations taking a pretty firm stance on AI governance and ethical frameworks that people were adopting. And so we were really curious to figure out, what was happening within these organizations as it relates to AI. And so our study that we focused on was Levers of Power in the Field of AI. It's an ethnography of personal influence and institutionalization. And we looked at essentially analyzing 12 decision makers who were spanned from government positions, higher education, business, and civil society. And we really wanted to try and figure out, how are these people navigating um, their positions of power in implementing or influencing how AI is used, created, adopted, or implemented within an organization. And so, big kudos to Tammy McKenzie. She's really the president of Aula, and she's our lead author for this particular study. But really, levers of power is a proxy for social mechanisms that shape how institutions respond to change. And within this context, it's really change in relation to AI. So we had some interesting findings for this particular study. One of our findings, and I will just maybe preface this with those 12 individuals make up people across Canada and North America. So unfortunately, we didn't have anyone based in Hawaii a part of this study, but I really see, as we begin to see more and more AI adoption and generation across, I think, our Hawaii infrastructure in terms of our organizations, I think it's a really great opportunity for us to dive deeper and better understand how Hawaii and organizations within our islands are using and adopting AI and how that might be similar or different across, North America. But one of the things that we saw was this relative personal power. And so we looked at, trying to get access to as many people as we can, emailing, LinkedIn, and different things to try and see who was interested in engaging. 12 of these people were interested in engaging, and they talked about, feeling like they were relatively, open and accessible to community members. And yet they really didn't engage with any community members outside of their organizations or institutions. And so we thought that was an interesting finding where we've got these sort of big key players in organizations, but not a lot of strong connections in their communities. And that seemed to be a major gap. We also saw tenure and empowerment as an interesting construct as we looked at positions of power. As expected, senior leaders who had, greater tenure seemed to indicate, higher positions of power within their organizations. But we also found that in more complex institutions with, sort of lots of different organizational layers, such as national governments, we saw that even people with lower positions of power still felt like they had a strong sense of personal agency when it came to influencing AI. So that was another interesting finding. Um, Another kind of interesting finding that we saw was in terms of institutional change, we found that epistemology and value is very important. So people's personal values and how they attach that to AI can really influence how people decide to move forward or implement or adopt AI. And so, I think sometimes we looked at this study with an assumption that people in business are going to adopt AI based on values such as capital, resources, market value, commercial value, and people in fields outside of business, such as higher education, might think about adopting AI differently. They might have, more of a focus on the collective good or benefit. And that wasn't always the case in our study. So we found, one instance of a very high level executive who, when they talked about adopting AI for their organization, they really were leaning heavily into collective good and didn't really necessarily care about commercial benefit or value. And in a very different instance, we had a professor who talked about, I'm going to use AI because it's cost effective and it will help to automate and reduce headcount because I'm in a resource constrained environment. And so we saw sort of these personal values and needs shaping AI adoption in ways that we didn't necessarily think were going to happen. So that was interesting as well. But I want to talk about this last finding around these dynamics of power. And so, this levers of power framework for understanding AI governance across institution is really based on 13 key principles that we saw. And after this, would love to open the floor for any questions or shift in a different direction. But these key points were really formative for us to get a sense of what levers of power means within organizations. And so the first is logics or epistemology, really. And that is that AI decisions we find are usually driven across, the majority of the 12 people we talked about based on commercial value. Some people talked about social justice and concerns about community benefit and harm, but there's also another component about techno-saviorism, where is this belief that, technology is going to solve all of our problems. And so once we adopt AI, we can automate, we can enhance, we can, do X, Y, and Z, and it's all going to be great. Um, the second component that we saw as a core theme was institutional infrastructure. And I think because AI is so new, institutions across sectors, that includes universities, governments, corporations, they're all trying to figure out where AI fits, whether it's utilities and public systems to education and governance. So everyone's still trying to figure this thing out. Governance was also interesting. So AI governance we found it really uneven and incomplete. So different organizations are at different levels of maturity in terms of adopting their own standards, but there's very little shared agreement or values or practices across governance and across these fields, which was perhaps not surprising, but still interesting. Collective interest, these are groups like unions, advocacy organizations. We found that these groups had very limited influence. And there is a huge need and an opportunity to really begin more active conversations around AI governance, AI regulation, AI policies, and a lot more efforts I think are needed there, especially as we think about how these groups interact with these corporations, governments, educational institutions. Regulation, it's weak. Right? We sort of don't see much regulation happening right now, especially in North America as it relates to AI. One of the interesting things that we are seeing is that consulting firms are really stepping into this sort of regulatory gap, and they are shaping these recommendations and narratives to a pretty significant sort of uh, lens around AI governance. So it's not necessarily people within the institutions or people outside of these institutions, but these third-party consultation firms that are coming in and seem to be really shaping this narrative around AI regulation and governance. Informal governance bodies, that's still developing. So again, those are the NGOs, the coalitions that are trying to sort of shape governance by promoting responsible AI practices. Lots of development needs there. Field configuring events, those are things like conferences, trainings, interdisciplinary collaborations that help set standards. That's very uneven. So we're seeing big tech dominating this space. Big tech is all about conferences, trainings. Google has their own, AI literacy and Amazon has their own thing. And so there's a lot of big tech dominance here, and we're seeing it really concentrated within these sort of organizations of power across tech, which is quite interesting. Status. So there's still, I think, a relative proximity that consulting firms have here, that they are, for the most part, being the influencers of policymakers, those in authority. So consultation firms are really kind of leading the game here. Organizational models. So large hierarchical tech companies have outsized their influence based on their maturity and power. But we are seeing sectors like higher education and government who are beginning to start to shape the environment more, but there's still, I think, a lot more need there. Norms and classifications, so that's around norms like ethics, responsible AI, transparency. Those things are still emerging and mean very different things across fields. And so there's still, again, sort of this need to shape and standardize across fields what we call these things in terms of governance and norms around AI use and functions. Relational channels are interesting. So this includes universities, consulting firms, NGOs, and influencers. We were looking at how these different groups were engaging with change and sort of influencing the broader AI landscape. And what we saw hands down is that the engineering community in particular, whether they're in big tech or universities, is shaping and spreading this AI evolution so rapidly. And sort of non-engineering or laypersons are really slow to the conversation in how we think about using, shaping, deploying, creating, designing AI systems and solutions. And so I think there's a big need for, how do we step up these relational channels and not just have it's great to have engineers. We need engineers, but we also need non-engineers to be at that table and working really closely in interdisciplinary, I think, segments to enhance responsible and ethical AI use. And then idea mobility, again, who's influencing? It's engineering by far. Our non-technical fields are moving way slower and getting to the table at a much slower rate as compared to our engineering folks. And so, how do we kind of navigate and change that dichotomy that we're seeing right now? So that was a lot of information. I'm sorry, folks, but those are sort of the core findings of our study. Again, these 12 very high, uniquely positioned change makers across industries and sort of the overlapping consistency that we're seeing in their shared stories.
So Natalie, the 13 that you just mentioned, is it listed as 13 in the paper?
It's a good question. So that paper that we listed is actually a preview of a much larger study that we have being published next year. And so that study actually highlights those 13 in a lot more detail and really dives into those components. So this study was just kind of a Manini little
Mm,
little snapshot.
teaser.
Yes, it was a total teaser of the bigger study coming.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, so if anybody was interested in actually looking at those 13, they'd have to pretty much take notes on what you just shared, right?
At this point in time, but I'm always happy to chat more.
Okay. 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 Well, if it actually it comes out in my AI companion that I have with Zoom, I'll be sure to share it with folks. Uh, any questions? I have some questions, but I want to give other folks
Yeah.
here a chance
I-
to chime in. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
yeah. Hey, Natalie, nice to meet you and thank you for bringing this really important topic. I was wanted to ask, I wrote it down as two, three, four, and five, your points.
Mhm.
Because I work a lot with local government counties and cities.
Mhm.
And I was just at a meeting recently, actually, where they brought a consultant in to the Public Works Department to talk to them about implementing AI as a recommendation.
Sure.
And what the Public Works said was really they're playing catch up with the public all the time. They're behind because of those issues you brought up in two, three, four, and five. And a lot of it has to do with where's the data going? Is it transparent? Can we legally do that? I don't know if you could talk to that a little bit, or because it seems to have the effect of the the public institutions are lagging behind, whereas the private, entrepreneurial ones are forging ahead, and you're getting this gap there.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think so. I think one of the really great questions that you have, Ken, is where on earth is the data going? And so there's kind of two types of Gen AI access that people have. There's sort of this, you know, go to Google, type in ChatGPT, and you've got access to, OpenAI or type in Claude Code or, so these sort of open access models. And at the end of the day, these models are taking data and they're funneling it back to a large data center that then is
Right.
used and recycled, right? And then there's these proprietary models that organizations can purchase in relation to, whatever AI company you want to work with, whether that's Cohere or OpenAI or Claude or, whatever, Anthropic. And you can purchase for a large sum of money these proprietary environments where there's no data feeding back into the model. But that's very expensive and very pricey. However, if you're working with sensitive PII, personally identifiable information, you're working with proprietary information, you really have to have those closed environments so that data isn't leaked into, some other data center somewhere and then fed back into training, or developing new models. So that's kind of at a high level, how we're seeing data shared or not, depending on the resources that an organization has to close down the system and work with these companies to ensure that that data is not being passed on to their data centers or not, if that makes sense.
Very good. You, you usually the county don't have the resources and money to do that often,
Right.
or it takes them a while to put that in place, budget wise, for example. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a huge challenge, and this is where we see sort of these slowdowns in decisions, right? Is that there's a lot
Right.
of
Yeah.
layers of I don't want to say tape, but these sort of layers that need to be built out. There needs to be budgeting, and these things are not cheap. So I think
No.
that there's so many components to where a company, a startup with 6 people can build rapidly and fast. And they don't necessarily have all of these red tape components that they necessarily need to get off the ground. So I think it's a really great call out, and I think that it's one great example of where we see a slowdown in an adoption in certain capacities and fields.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thanks.
That's a great question, Ken. I appreciate it.
I want, please, if you have a question, uh, do a quick introduction of yourself so that Natalie kind of knows where you're coming from. And Ken is on Kauai, so he does a lot of training with Kupuna and on the topic of digital literacy and
Yeah.
the whole idea of the gap that you're describing, whether it's a gap in terms of digital, the digital divide, or this AI gap, right?
Yeah.
It's all new technology that's creating a widening um, kind of a difference between who has access, who knows what the resource is, and those on the other side that don't.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
wanted to ask you, Natalie. You mentioned that the folks that seem to be at the forefront of crafting some of the legislation tend to be these third party consultative groups. Are
Yeah.
they doing it on their own dime, or is there another sort of source that is funding their participation? Because typically consultants don't do anything unless they're getting paid to do it.
Absolutely. And you are so right, Bert. We're seeing this big market within consulting firms that say, hey, we now have these specialized AI trained engineers or, change makers. And so if you purchase our service, we will look at your system, we will determine what you need, and then we will deliver some type of solution. And so that's been, sort of the name of the game that we've been seeing really consistently within consulting firms is shifting the narrative and really marketing themselves as we can provide you an AI solution as long as you pay us. So there's definitely a lucrative
Mm-hmm.
market, and these consultation firms are really, I think, at the forefront of leading and pushing businesses to adopt AI based on this new type of business model to sort of say, hey, we have we have the expertise, so you can just rely on us.
Thanks.
That's a great question, Bert. What other questions that do we have? I'm
Yeah.
happy to also pivot. I think there's one of the things that I will say is, as I think about literacy, I work at the University of Hawaii, and I work with grad students, and so there's as an educator, I'm grappling with AI. And then, in businesses, I'm sort of grappling with AI. And one of the things that I've been seeing, we think about technological literacy, and then we sort of layer on AI literacy. What's interesting, I think, from a non-engineering, and I don't want to say necessarily layperson perspective, but sort of a less engineering minded individual, I see this sort of as an interesting leveling of the playing field. I mean, I work with very high level executives, and I work with, brand new learners, and everyone kind of seems at the same pace and understanding of AI literacy, which is pretty interesting. And I think what I'm seeing as I work with these many different, groups is there's such a need for enhanced education around what AI is, how AI works, how do we evaluate AI, and then when should we use and not use AI? And that is sort of the same four questions that I work with, again, students with all the way up to very high levels in organizations. Um, and it's an interesting gap, but I think there's a big need for education about, what are these, how do these models even exist, and what can we expect from them? So that's just kind of an observation that as I've been working in my different roles and fields, I see and seem to address or have to address on a weekly basis.
So what you brought up in your presentation, as well as what you just mentioned, there are segments of our community that are, at the forefront, and typically those are in Hawaii at least, there's the tech startups,
Yep.
there's probably corporations that are having internal discussions around AI, and then you have everybody else, which is the lay person or the folks that are not necessarily, or maybe wouldn't consider themselves a tech worker.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that aren't necessarily in the conversation or part of a conversation. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on what would you see having to happen in Hawaii that would help to bring together those individuals that are perhaps being left out, and how do we sustain some sort of dialogue, conversation, so that we can help to close this this AI gap, and do it now, and do it with a sense of consistency, and not just do it like a one-shot deal and then we're done and then we're moving on to
Right.
something else.
Right. It's it's a complex, I think it's a complex answer, Bert. I think on one hand, I I see a lot of assumptions made about AI, and a lot of incorrect assumptions with AI. And I think on one hand, how do we go about educating our population broadly on AI and what it is and what it isn't? And so whether that's these field configuring events, going back to one of our principles of how do we set up community events, community conferences, community trainings that invite the community out to say, generative AI, number one, is a really big word. And what the heck does that mean? And let's kind of
Mhm.
get to the basics of what is Gen AI, and how do you, as a community member, need to, and just as an individual, need to be really weary and careful about AI? And what are some good things that you should know about, even if it's, sharing personal information that you probably don't want to take a picture of your driver's license and then upload that to, ChatGPT to, then be able to get your driver's license number to fill out a PDF form, right? So I think, there's some really important just best practices that everyone in our community should know in terms of AI. And I think the question is, how do we how do we get that education out and start getting people interested and engaged and wanting to better protect themselves? So I think that's kind of the first question is, how do we educate broadly? And then the second piece is to your point around not just bring people to the table, but how do we maintain ongoing conversations? And I think that that's where we need to establish some type of, community and shared community across the islands where we're inviting people to come to the table and engage with, what are your perspectives around technology? We know in Hawaii, there's data sovereignty issues, and there's been a lot of mistreatment with Native Hawaiian culture and Native Hawaiian data. And so I think that there's a real concern that I have around how are we treating people? How are we treating the community? And and I know for a fact that these foundation models have been trained on a lot of, Hawaii-based data and community-based data that's available online. But if we look at that ratio compared to, the other corners of the web, we can already assume that there is biased data that is fed into these vectorizations of these models, and that could likely produce biased and harmful outputs. And even being aware of that, I think, is really important. But I think we need people in the community to be engaged, and we want very different people in the community from all facets of the community, because I think those different interdisciplinary voices are important to be able to shape what we want to do as potentially a state and a broader nation when it comes to AI and responsible use. So I think that was a very long response, Bert, but I think that there's an education piece that's needed broadly, and then really encouraging and promoting these shared community governance conversations about how we get people to the table and hear their voices and ensure that their voices are heard and adopted, as we all try and figure out what AI governance means, since we really haven't figured that out across fields or industries yet.
And part of the what you just described in terms of education and workshops, and we also have the folks from AI Safety Awareness Project come onto the Hui and talk about what they're interested in doing, and they are very interested in coming back sometime maybe first quarter next year to do a series of things. And so I think part of what I wanted to do, and the Hui is a good community forum for discussions like this, because the people who have actually attended and taken the time out of their morning to hear topics like this are pretty dedicated. These are the regulars, and I think through these regulars, there is definite interest in how do we, continue this dialogue. So, I'm kind of thinking, and I'm open to anybody who would like to help me in this endeavor, is to try to, pull a kind of like maybe a pre-planning session before the end of the year, so that we can start to identify who's willing to be a part of this, and then that meeting would then help to kind of plan out, like, when do we want to do it, where do we want to do it, what topics should we include, and then get the folks like yourself, Natalie, as well as the AI safety awareness folks and others that are involved with AI. And there's a handful of them, in Hawaii. How do we get them together and start to plan this out? And I think through that kind of convening, which would be like a series of workshops, perhaps like in the February or March timeframe, we could leverage that as a stepping stone to, more kind of committed engagement over the course of time. So anyway, I'm looking for, volunteers to support. Annalyn, I see you nodding, so I'm definitely gonna rope you into this. And again, anybody who's interested, who would like to be a part of this kind of pre-planning, and then ultimately, how do we roll this out? And we would like to do it in a hybrid mode, right? So that we're not leaving any of the neighbor islands out, and we could perhaps even do some on the neighbor islands. So that's something that's very open. Natalie, this group is a statewide group, and Ken and Mark are on Kauai, and typically we'll have people from, all over the state. And when we come up with ways of doing educational workshops, we want to be very mindful of being inclusive. So we definitely want to make this a statewide movement. Comments, suggestions, anybody?
Yeah, I would love to get involved, Bert. So I'm more of like a technical folk. I'm a software digital designer. I know a little bit of front-end engineering, but I'm also in those spaces. And I do know that we're moving very quickly, and sometimes we're a little bit fragmented in our communities or in the technical communities, but we could do more talking with the non-technical folks, especially in Hawaii. So I'm really excited about this effort to just convene everyone. Yeah, so count me in.
Great.
Yeah, but love to be involved also. I do a lot of AI training for companies and seniors, Kapuna nonprofits. So I'd love to help out in the training aspect. Happy to do that also.
Yeah, and Ken's on Kauai, and Ken, I'm sure the folks over at Kuleana Work and Pete Simon and those guys, and that could be a great little hub of workshops that could take place on Kauai, and I love it that Linda Clark, who's on Maui, and she's in a very remote area on Maui, and we could we can definitely get this across our entire state. So put your interests in the chat, and then what we will do is follow up and see if we can bring together a lot of the folks that are not only on this call but others that are involved in some aspect of AI, as well as the ones that are interested in helping to educate. And I know I did get a chance to talk to our state librarian, and she's definitely interested too. So we also have that as a venue for some of this training. Any other questions for Natalie? Seeing none, I thought maybe Dan, you were leaning into something, but no.
Well, in my own case, I've taken the Gemini training that UH offers, and I'm going to 2 weeks from today. UH West Oahu is having a in-person teaching with AI workshop. So get some guidance and thinking about that. So yeah, it's an evolving field. I haven't figured out anything yet that I really need to use AI to do. But I'm sure this thing's out there, and that's why I'm looking forward to this all morning workshop in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So again, thanks, Natalie. And this discussion is just touching on the tip of the iceberg. Education is really important, and you did mention governance, and governance is one of those words that you can easily sort of say it, just like innovation, right? You can say it, but then what ultimately ends up being the path to innovation or the path to governance can be a sort of multi-pronged path to whatever. And I think, Natalie, you mentioned it pretty nicely, is that there's sort of macro level and there's micro level governance. And that's a good kind of way to kind of parse it out. It can happen on a number of different fronts. So again, thanks to everybody who's interested. Looks like almost everybody on the call is interested. So we will follow up with, an actual convening, and then plan for that before the end of the year, and then look at something happening. We just got to figure out where it's going to take place, when it's going to take place, and start getting people involved with the actual logistics of all of that. So Natalie, appreciate it, and this is not going to be the first and last time you're going to be on the Hui call. So just be just be prepared for that.
I'm
I
looking
tell I,
forward to
I
it.
tell people, Natalie, it's like Hotel California. You can you're you're welcome to come in, but you can't leave.
I'm really thrilled to be here. I've been really wanting to figure out, where can I help our local community, especially in the learnings that I've gained from these different, big tech organizations. And I think there's a lot of learnings and I'm excited to share, but also partner and figure out, where I can support and also where I can learn. So thank you all so much for listening to me on a Wednesday morning. And thank you so much for
Oh,
the warm welcome. It's a pleasure. And please reach out if you've got questions. And I'm looking forward to being able to support and work with you all wherever I can.
all right. Thank you. Thanks, Natalie. Okay, so we just got a couple quick things on the agenda that I wanted to share as announcements. And so this will take pretty fast. It'll be pretty fast. So just recently, you all are aware that the legislature has Act 310, and there was $50 million that was distributed amongst a bunch of nonprofits. And I just wanted to bring attention to a couple that I know that were able to get some funds for some digital literacy work. One of which is Hawaii Literacy, and they got something like 300,000. And also Waianae Coast, they got actually a larger sum, like something on the tune of like $1 million, but not all of that is going toward digital literacy. But I did talk to Chrissy, and she said that some of that is being used for digital literacy. So that's good. I mean, at least there's a path forward to having some of these classes take place. So that I wanted to share that, and you can find a link to Act 310 on the agenda, and it's being administered by the folks over at AUW. There's a link to a Benton Institute, kind of like a webinar panel that's taking place on December 9th, which is next week, Tuesday. And it's about community broadband networks. And it's not only about community broadband networks from an infrastructure standpoint. It's about community broadband networks as a catalyst for digital learning. And so I thought that might be interesting. And Linda, I would kind of like direct that to you because, with your work in Kaupo and your interest in, community networks, this might be an interesting topic to get some insight from some of these folks that have been working on community networks, across the country. So, in fact, I think one of the panelists, her name is Esther. She was actually involved with the setting up of Pu'uhonua Waianae, Pu'uhonua Waimanalo. So, there's some direct relationship to, the work that's being presented on this Benton Institute panel and stuff in Hawaii. Okay, so that's the other one. And then Dan, you'll appreciate this other report that I made a link to. It's on the I think it's in the mailings that Benton Institute sends out, but it's the ACP study, and I'll save everybody the the time for you to read it. But basically, what it says is that it analyzed, I guess, a lot of ACP participants, and they found a direct correlation from ACP participation to actually being able to find a job. So that's the conclusion, and I think that was it was a good conclusion, maybe one that would be kind of assumed, but I think they did a pretty good data analysis and came up with the data that proved that. And unfortunately, the ACP did end, but it is a good indication that it was a good program that helped contribute to not only jobs but workforce. So I wanted to share that with you all.
Yeah,
And
thank
then,
you.
yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I'm just scanning the abstract. They did emphasize the importance of training and enablement beyond just to bare, literacy, get going, so that people become aware of the kind of the resources available to them, not just can you turn on your computer and go to the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think, from what I gather, there's, this whole field of digital equity, digital literacy, is sort of pivoting to digital skills and how it contributes to the workforce. So, we've always been very supportive of that, and I see that some of these studies are indicating that there's a lot of continued interest in how the digital space is contributing to workforce, and I would also add to the fact that we here in Hawaii and everybody here on the Broadband Hui has the digital economy top of mind, and so how do we continue to do the work that we're doing with the idea that this is contributing to the digital economy. And another effort that I'd like to see if we can initiate and catalyze is a vision for the digital economy as we move into 2026, and through this vision, how can we get others to really kind of buy into that vision, right? We're pretty much grassroots. We can help articulate what it is that vision might be, but it really helps to have leadership kind of get on the bandwagon and actually support a robust digital economy here in Hawaii. So how does that vision look like? How can we help to kind of like codify it and develop it into some form of a report so that people can take it's just like how we as the Broadband Hui started back in 2020, and we came together and really put together something called the Digital Equity Declaration. And that declaration was something that was a foundational document that helped build our digital equity kind of guiding light. So perhaps in 2026 we need to do something around the digital economy. Okay, so yeah, that's another suggestion. In the last couple of seconds here, I wanted to just check in with Susan. Susan, did you guys want to have anything about the shots press release? If not, we can hold that for later. Susan, still there?
Hey, sorry, Bert. Yeah, Sarah was on, but I don't see her now.
Was she gonna say anything about it?
She was. But I next week or next time maybe.
Okay, no worries. We can do it next time. In fact, next time would be kind of timely. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that DHHL will have an update on their RFP. Jaron said that he's working on it. He'd like to have it. He actually said that he'd like to have it done so that he can announce it by the end of December. I said, well, our last meeting is going to be on the 17th. So he said, okay, let me see if I can get something going before the 17th. So I invited, and I'll remind him, for Jaron to come on and talk about the DHHL RFP that was issued. And it's actually due today. So, I think it'd be kind of timely if they had kind of an update on the status of its, let's say, award, right, on the 17th. So we got a couple of good announcements pending that. Okay. Any last comments, suggestions, feedback? Okay, hearing none. Let me put up our concluding slide here. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the 260th convening of the Broadband Hui. Appreciate all your participation. Appreciate all your feedback and continued efforts to help close this digital divide, whether it's through AI literacy, data literacy, computer literacy, internet literacy. I mean, all of the above, I think, is within our wheelhouse. So with that, you guys have a great next couple of weeks, and we'll see you back here on the 17th. So until then, you stay safe and stay awesome. Aloha, everybody.